Thank you, Chopal. So I just want to start by thanking everybody who has come to the second session for sticking with me on this. There's a lot to unfold and unpack in terms of trying to tackle this topic. But I think it's worthwhile, to spend a little bit of time doing this. So welcome back, everybody who's here for the second part of this 4-part series. So again, this started last Sunday. It will run this Sunday, obviously, and then the next 2 Sundays as well. And I just want to remind all of you, like I did at the beginning of last session, whatever support that you can give to DNKL, our sponsoring Dharma Center, is greatly appreciated, but not required in direct connection to payment of any kind for this course. We offer all of our teachings, whether it's our resident teachers like Geshe Darge or Rinpoche, or guest teachers such as myself. We do not require a fee, which you all know, I think, already. And then again, just the state, which is also our tradition, any information that I disseminate today, if there's any fault in any of it, then that's totally on me, not my teachers, not related to core text and commentaries as documented in our tradition. And I'm always open for devil advocate questions about what I'm stating, especially when we come to the part of what we'll be talking about substantially today, which I will be delving more into some correlations between quantum mechanics specifically, and I'll get to talking about what that really means, and Buddhism. And I think I'm going to try to keep that certainly will not be scientific. I'm not a scientist. It also won't be mathematical, which quantum mechanics is heavily rooted in mathematics, as I'm not a mathematician. It will be conceptual. And so I'm framing all of that against the backdrop of known scientific evidence, et cetera, in that realm. But we'll get to that in a minute. So as we start, I just want to reframe what we're trying to do in this course. And the reason I'm doing that is because it is it is an involved topic in terms of what I'm trying to discuss, link together, etc., and making sure that we sort of don't get lost along the way. And also because in the last course, at the last session, and also in this session, you won't hear too much directly about the fundamental questions that I posed at the beginning of the series, and also in the descriptive text that's at the website. But trust me, we'll be getting to those because that's where we're headed. This is a journey, and I have to unpack it. But just to reframe those questions, it's like we're really going to try to get a good sense of what compassion really, what is it really? What's its source? How does it exist in us? How is it developed? How is it deployed? How it is experienced by us and others? Why does it matter? These are all things I talked about in the last session, but I did want to restate them. And what difference does it make? And in this course that we'll be trying to develop a very alive and very dynamic understanding and experience of compassion, the interconnectedness of all things, not just all beings, and how this affects and connects all of us in existence, both physically, if you will, from what I was calling and defined in the first session as from the outside, and then internally from the inside, which gets more to the type of focus I want to put on what we come away with in this experience from this course, certain practices and such. So in the first session, just do a quick recap. I framed out what we mean by the title, especially how the 3 E's, entanglement, emptiness, and enlightenment, indicate and point toward one or more method of exploring our connectedness. I focused a lot on connectedness. Of course, I'm not going to go back into detail. Anybody who needs to, if you haven't, because I did unpack a lot in that course, there is a YouTube video available of each one of these sessions, and the first one is available. An announcement went out Friday reminding us about this course. There was a link directly in there, but for some of you, maybe who couldn't find it, all of our courses there's links from the DNK website. That's not as intuitive as it might, maybe as it could be, but the way you get to that, just to give you a little direction, on the main page, if you go to, I think it says contact. Yeah, there's one of the main menus at the top, and you'll see, some of you might be familiar with it. There's a bunch of icons that are for all our social media connections, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, which is a red circle with a arrow in it, which is, sort of a video icon, right? Most of us know what that is, but that's where you'll find recordings of the class. The next, what we did in the course is we explored one of modern science's outside takes, if you will, that's my word, on the interconnectedness of all things. We looked at our existence, our entire universe as we know it to exist through the lens of modern physics of cosmology and astronomy, which is very exciting, I think. And then further, we reviewed an important section of His Holiness the Dalai Lama's book, The Universe in a Single Atom, which was mostly focused on chapter 4. So I mentioned that in the course, and I encouraged us to, on our own time, to take a closer and separate look at it. There's a lot to unpack there. Again, way more than what can be unpacked in this course. But it did help. What I did do was I tried to create a juxtaposition between the Buddhist worldview of the universe in parallel to the modern physics of cosmology and astronomy, especially regarding the Big Bang, the origin of our universe. So that was interesting. Also explored was providing some elementary information about other worldviews about the universe and its origin. Again, a lot of this is in that chapter 4 that His Holiness gives us a quick survey of. So, I tried to cover some of those, especially the earlier Indian traditions, not so much traditions from the West. Again, His Holiness's frame of reference is Eastern traditions. So I encourage everybody to take a closer look at that. I think it helps very much in terms of finding a place to situate the worldview we're exploring through Buddhism as it relates to these earlier worldviews, and then also scientific worldview, which led us into our next discussion, which was how Buddhism and science are similar yet dissimilar, especially in one key component, which is going to be a big focus for the rest of this course, which is the topic of consciousness. So again, this is somewhat explored in somewhat detail by His Holiness in the first 2 chapters of The Universe in a Single Atom, which I pointed out in the first session. We then ended the session with a meditation I called the Singularity Meditation. And I just want to say a few words about that. The idea of that meditation was to spur your appreciation for one of the basic realities that empirically exist in each and every one of us, that we are not only fully connected 100% to the outside universe, but we're literally made up of it, all of us. There's nothing else except this concept that we call consciousness, which we'll explore. But it's really, that should give us some fundamental. I started the course there because I'm hoping that it gives us some fundamental experience of how we are literally connected to everything, and we're not separate, not fundamentally. We might experience our lives moment by moment that way, but that's not the case. Also, I focused on this concept of singularity, which is the state of the universe, as the physics of cosmology tell us, at right before, although there was no time and space, so I pause there when I say that, right before the Big Bang, there was the state of singularity, before time, before space moved into existence. And again, from the Buddhist point of view, all of this is exactly what we're made up of. And we concur with the science of cosmology and astronomy in that regard, except, again, we must include consciousness. And the rest of the meditations try to bring us into a little bit of an experience of that, where we use the vehicle of light and the very subtle particles that make it up as we know it, and that we emanated that light out from our heart center and gathered it back to our heart center, both the entire outside universe, and then the meditation continued where we brought our own inside existence into this heart center. And I also mentioned that this indicates, well, I don't know if I mentioned this, but this in the meditation, this does indicate something special about using light, the process of gathering and collecting, and specifically bringing it to our heart center. And we'll be addressing that a little bit more and unpacking that a little bit more over the next two sessions. And anyway, in this meditation, I called the end result of the specific gathering process that we engage in, that moment of singularity. And also mentioned that this is also possibly akin to the concept in Buddhism of the indestructible drop at our heart center, where we have all of existence held in that indestructible drop. So this was the singularity meditation that we did. Try to give us just a sense of bringing us to that moment before time and space in the material universe manifest it, and also ourselves as an individual before we manifest it. And before we had any movement, literally our breath, our thoughts, any of our five senses, because that movement from a Buddhist point of view is when we activate what we call our projecting karma. And we'll talk more about that later. And that's when our life moves into the motion of formation. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as well. So this was all part of that, that meditation. And there's a lot more I could say about the singularity concept, singularity, or as we call it in Buddhism, the indestructible drop. And I will, but again, it will come up later as we unpack more of what we're trying to do here in the course. Yeah, I just make one more comment to say that it would be really good, as much as any of you can, to read the related chapters to all of this stuff that is in His Holiness's book, The Universe in a Single Atom. Yeah, because I found personally over the years from when I first read that book and then try to wrestle with its concepts and relate it and connect it specifically to the question of why does this matter? Why did His Holiness write a whole book about it? It unfolded over a long period of time. So not like in 4-week session like I'm doing here, but for me personally, like years, and still is unfolding, right? So anyway, for the rest of the time we have today, I said this right before we before we formally started, but I did want to pause one more time and just see if anybody has any questions about what we've covered so far. And if you do, now's the time before I just sort of go. We can ask questions later too, if we have time. Sometimes we run out of time. But if there's no questions, I'll move ahead. I'm looking at everybody who's in the session, and I don't see anybody has some questions. Okay, so I'll proceed. So today we're going to explore what modern science has to offer us in terms of this topic, meaning what's literally going on in terms of experience of life. And again, another outside take, meaning, the world of phenomena. And that you'll hear me start to use the word phenomena a lot more as we move forward, because that's what we call the outside world in Buddhism. But we're going to explore some key concepts that are present in quantum mechanics. And then we'll follow this, but this will mostly end up in the next session, frankly, by an initial exploration of some of the key connecting points that can be found between these quantum mechanic key concepts and theories and principles and Buddhist theories and practices, especially those found in the Buddhist concept of what we call method and wisdom. Wisdom is another word for emptiness, also in the wheel of life and karma. It all sort of works together. And through this, discover a key role that consciousness plays, along with the attending experiences of emotion, thoughts, values, spiritual aspirations, and how they play out in our everyday moment-by-moment experience of ourself and phenomena. So I have to start, before we jump directly into that, I have to just start by sort of wrapping up a tail end of last session, because I looked at the clock and I sort of had to stop before I really got to the end of what I had outlined in the course. So I just wanted to underscore some of what we see in chapter 4, which was the basis of much of what I talked about last session. And it's important because it leads right into what we're going to talk about today. And it starts with, in that chapter, His Holiness talks about the importance of understanding the container. He calls it the container versus the contained. The container is the universe. The contained is us. I love those words. And it's important to understand how important the contained are in Buddhist cosmology and worldview. That has to do with sentient beings, and that there's a fundamental concern in Buddhist practice with sentient beings, specifically with ending the suffering of all sentient beings forever, permanently. So when we talk about these concepts I'm throwing out there that come from science, it is always with the utmost goal in mind to bring it back to and connect it to us. This is what's really, really important in the main focus of what's happening in this series of classes that I'm presenting. With that said, we still, even in the Buddhist worldview, we can't proceed with just talking about the contained without talking about the container, the universe, the context. It does lie in our fundamental experience of existence, which is the world of phenomena. Self as us, and then phenomena. So that's part of what we're just going to finish exploring here. So Buddhism believes that this process of what science tells us is the process of the universe unfolding, formation after the Big Bang, abiding, which is its ongoing expansion, and that it's followed by a third phase, which is its destruction. So it has a 3-phase process. But for Buddhism, science doesn't answer like, well, what was there before the Big Bang? Science conveniently ignores it. I mean, His Holiness talks in the book about like when he talks to scientists, has talked to scientists over the years, there has been about this point, it's like, yeah. But when they get in the lab and start doing their experiments, they sort of just block that out for the most part, not all of them. But for Buddhism, the process that I just described has another component. We're going to talk about that very quickly. But it's important to underscore that that process is beginningless. And further, that it occurs on an ongoing basis, an incalculable number of times concurrently, leading to untold world systems and universes. And that could be seen in His Holiness's text in that 4th chapter when he made reference to the flower ornament scripture, which I mentioned in the first session. And it describes, His Holiness describes quickly what that means. But that, it's basically a mind-boggling number of universe systems, untold worlds, which are reduced to atoms, and each atom contains untold worlds. Still, the number of world systems will not be exhausted. So that's pretty intense. It also indicates, maybe keep it in mind, because it's going to indicate some of the things we talk about with quantum mechanics today. And also keep it in mind, because it does harken back to what we talked about last week, which is the number of trillion of atoms and molecules that are in our body at every given moment. That is connected to like the entire universe. We're made up of the same stuff, which we've already covered. So again, I encourage you to look at that. I also mentioned that another beautiful text that comes from an Indian tradition, but is utilized in Buddhism, and His Holiness mentions this as well in the text, is Indra's jewel net, which is a analogy that shows the interconnected reality of all these worlds infinitely. That's the key. And the jewel net, the gems, are key to this, because as a net of jewels that Indra has placed over the universe, it reaches out to infinite space. And each knot on the net is a crystal gem, which is connected to all the other gems and reflects in itself all the others. So then this is meant to give a sense that even at its center, all are reflected in each other. Even at the center jewel in the net, the entire universe is present. Infinite universes, infinite worlds. And this ties back to this concept of, it's a concept. So it's a little, you got to use your imagination, be creative. The analogy is meant to invoke the idea of singularity, the idea of that indestructible drop, where you actually can have all known universes, or you want to stick with the one universe we have, can be contained and held and experienced in that way, which is a pretty, sort of heavy duty concept, right? So, this is what His Holiness is detailing, and this is why he brings it up in case it's not clear. But in Buddhism, there's 4 eras. So here's where it's different than science. So there isn't just the era that starts with the Big Bang, where there's formation, time and space starts, and then there's expansion and sustained existence, if you will, and then that being followed by ultimately destruction or the end. There's another phase, which in Buddhism is called emptiness or the void. For Buddhists, this is an essential ingredient, because remember, from a Buddhist cosmology point of view, the beginning, when we talk about there being a beginning to the universe, it's beginningless. That's a statement. And that it comes forth in this continuing 4-stage process of out of a void comes formation, abiding, and destruction in a repeated fashion over and over again, not just linearly, but as the flower ornament scripture talks about, incalculably, simultaneously, on and on and on. So this is kind of big thinking, but you could just use your imagination to sort of entertain, like, to me, it's sort of like, wow, well, that's it. That's really amazing, or it could be amazing. But just to get a little bit more specific for a few minutes, again, if you read chapter 4, His Holiness talks about this 4-stage process. And it can be seen especially in the Kala Chakra system, which I mentioned last time. It's a cosmology manifesto of the existence of the universe and how it comes into formation, etc. So in the text, His Holiness talks about this system. It presents space not as a total nothingness, okay, but as a medium of empty particles, which are thought of as extremely subtle matter, material particles. These empty particles is the basis for the evolution and dissolution of the 4 elements. And that process of dissolution occurs in the order of earth, water, fire, air, and then dissolves backwards in the same way. That's embedded in that 4-stage cycle of out of the void or empty particles comes. This would be what's before the Big Bang, if you will. So that's kind of an important indication that if we look with any kind of seriousness at the Kala Chakra world system, that the emptiness or the void is there, but don't think of it as void so much in the way that some of us think about it in a Western way, but in the sense that His Holiness is telling us about empty particles. And that is a key. So the cycle of the universe, His Holiness continues in the following ways. First is this period of formation. Next, a period when the universe endures. So far, we're in sync with science. Then there's a period when it's destroyed. But this is where it moves away from science, followed by a period of void before the formation of a new universe, is what I was just talking about. Further, the Kala Chakra system says that during the 4th period, that of emptiness, the space particles or the empty particles subsist. And it is from these particles that all the matter within a new universe is formed. It is in these empty particles that we find the fundamental cause of the entire physical universe. So that's fascinating to think about. And it might give some meaning, not that you have to buy into it, but like when a Buddhist says to you, well, I learned that we've been here since beginningless time. Well, what the hell does that mean? So the Kali Chakra system does give us some indication there. Further, on that basis, His Holiness says the specific potential, remember the word potential, of these particles, that the structure of the universe and everything in it, planets, stars, sentient beings such as humans and animals, have come about. It's on that basis of what was just described in that 4th phase. And we can go back to the ultimate cause of material objects of the world. We did that last time when we talked about la matière, the Catholic French monk who came up with the concept. It was his label, the Big Bang, where he took the entire known universe and just as a thought experiment, walked it back to its ultimate, which is before time and space. And then that's that moment of singularity. So His Holiness and the Kala Chakra system are saying sort of the same thing here. And it's similar to start to tiptoe into the world of quantum mechanics, to a concept in quantum mechanics called the quantum vacuum. So His Holiness points this out. He says this idea echoes in the Kala Chakra theory. So specifically in the form of space particles. So not to get too crazy here, but this is all in the text, and that's why, of course, I encourage you to read it. I'm trying to bring it a little bit to life in the way that I am talking. Further, I make a few more comments. The Kala Chakra text further claims that prior to its formation, meaning a particular universe, it remains in a state of emptiness. I'm trying to give a little character to like, what is this emptiness state that the Kala Chakra system has that science doesn't have? And in that state where all material elements exist in the form of, here's that word again, potentiality or potential. Then at a certain point, oh no, here comes a new concept we haven't thrown into the mix yet. At a certain point when the karmic propensities of the sentient beings who are likely to evolve in that particular universe ripen, the air particles begin to aggregate, and then on to the fire, to the water, to the earth, and then voila, something happens where formation occurs. The phase of emptiness produces this. It's a lot to think about, but this is what we're talking about here. So from the Buddhist perspective, His Holiness poses at the end of chapter 4, he poses a whole bunch of questions. But before he does, he says, like, just to remind us, the critical issue for Buddhists is the role of consciousness. And that's all wrapped up in this phase of emptiness or the void. And we'll be exploring and unpacking that. And how we will be exploring that is through diving in and looking more closely at what do we mean by karmic propensities of sentient beings. How could they function in this Kala Chakra world system that goes on repeatedly over and over? And how does that fit in with the science of natural law of causality? His Holiness asks all these questions. He talks about having his own view, but he's most concerned about, not concerned, but he's like, he says, how can, when a universe has evolved to a stage where it can support the life of sentient beings, how does its fate, he's talking about the universe, become, here's another word we're going to hear a lot today, entangled? His Holiness uses that word on purpose. It's not like just, he's using it because he's talking about, in the book here, he is talking about quantum mechanics to a great degree. So how does that become entangled with the karma of beings who inhabit it? And he says even more difficult than that is the first intervention of karma. When does it first occur? When does that karmic potential first happen in sentient beings who will occupy that universe, which sets it in motion coming into being? Yeah, so it could hurt your brain, but it's meant to really give you a dynamic sense of the kind of questions we want to explore in terms of asking what Buddhism recommends when we get to the end of the day in terms of practices that we can engage in that will open this up for us. And then he talks about, the problem of reconciling these things: science, natural law, Darwinism, in the ordinary physical science world, and in that sense, cause and effect versus cause and effect from a karmic ripening point of view. And this is a big deal for him, and asks us to think about it, very much so. So basically, he frames it at the end of the chapter by saying that how do Buddhist cosmological theories envision the unfolding of the relationship between the karmic propensities of sentient beings and the evolution of the physical universe? What is the mechanism by which karma connects to the evolution of a physical system? So he says that the Abhidharma, the Buddhist Abhidharma text, don't really directly address this. We talked about the Abhidharma text. They're texts that talk about the cosmological structure of the universe, including ourselves, right down to its subatomic particles. He does say, though, that the Kala Chakra text does closely correlate. There are close correlations, he says, drawn between the cosmos and the body of sentient beings living in it. I painted some of that reality for us in our first class. That's why I started there. So there's a lot of questions that His Holiness poses, and they're all worthy of further exploration in that regard. And we're going to try to not forget that and come back and unpack that as we move along in the course here. But I'm going to leave it at that for now, and just simply mention that as we turn our attention and focus to today's further topic, an exploration of science in the form of quantum mechanics, that we just want to keep this, what we've already covered, in our frame of reference. They're not two separate things. The cosmology that has been put forth right up to today's science, which what I talked about last week takes us right up to today's science in terms of the structure of ourselves in the universe. That's very much interwoven with quantum science, quantum mechanics science that we're going to talk about, and what we want to address here. Of course, I don't want to be dismissive of other worldview systems. Again, His Holiness talks about them in chapter 4. These include systems that are based on theism and various iterations of the laws of cause and effect. And we talked about them a little bit last time, but we're really focused here on deepening our understanding of the Buddhist worldview of emptiness, and as it's expressed by a Sangha. In the text, His Holiness mentions a Sangha. He labels this as something called dependent origination, and how we understand as Buddhists the origins of the universe in terms of that theory. Literally, that it can only be that things arise independence on each other and don't come from a sort of a universal presence that is divorced from that. I don't even want to say creator, because that's putting too fine a label on it. I think we need to leave room for that in the context of what these words mean, these concepts mean. So again, we'll talk more directly about consciousness and karmic propensities, as His Holiness has brought these up as we move in. Actually, just that's not a spoiler alert, just a point, make sure we're not losing our thread here. This will be coming into front and center stage with a spotlight on it in our next session. So make sure you come back for that. But for now, we're going to talk about quantum mechanics and how we can do certain correlations between our second E, which is in the title, which is emptiness, and quantum mechanics. And I do think this will help us tackle the further exploration of consciousness and karmic propensities that will be coming up in in our discussion. So with that said, we're going to jump substantially to the part of His Holiness's book where he talks directly about emptiness in connection with what the title of the chapter refers to. This is chapter 3. He calls relativity and quantum physics. We're going to focus not so much on Einstein's theories of relativity. There's a special theory of relativity, and of course, there's a theory of relativity, but more quantum mechanics. And I'm going to try to just talk about it conceptually, and along the way, do my own sort of editorial insertions to say what this might be indicating in terms of this connection. So hopefully this will be helpful to you, because I don't want this to get overly scientific. I don't know. There might be some scientists like in our class, but like that's not, I don't think I'm talking to you. I mean, I'm not, but you're welcome here. And you could also clarify anything I say that you might think is a little fuzzy. So with that said, there is, as I said, this is in chapter 3. So if you haven't read chapter 3 yet, you might want to go back and look at it after this class. Also, His Holiness is going to talk in chapter 3 about a lot more of the specifics in terms of history of theory of relativity, quantum mechanics, as it relates to his journey of interacting with the universe of those scientists and the theories that come along with those scientists, his own personal journey. I don't do that. I'm not following the book as a text in that regard, but that stuff is interesting. And he does very skillfully bring up tons of, well, a lot of quantum-based theories and principles along the way. And again, you might need to read it a couple of times, or if you're smarter than me, as I've referred to myself. I don't know if it was in this class or another class I was teaching, as I'm a little slow. I'm just an Italian boy from Clifton. So we use the word, stonad. So I'm a little slow, and I have to like sort of come up. I'm a little slow in the uptake. So I had to read this a lot of times over many years, and then go do my exploration, right, of quantum mechanics and science. So the first thing I want to say is, what is quantum mechanics? So definitionally, it's a branch of mechanics that deals with the mathematical description of the motion and interaction of subatomic particles, incorporating the concept of quantization of energy, wave-particle duality. Duality is a really important word. The uncertainty principle and corresponding principles. So for some of you, that might be like, okay, whatever. But it's important to know that quantum mechanics is considered the foundation of all quantum physics, including quantum chemistry, quantum field theory, quantum technology, and quantum informational science, which is where we find computing, which is like a big hot thing over the last 20 years. So, just keep in mind, we're talking about something when we talk about quantum theory, physics, mechanics, and all these subfields, as what's called in science as sort of the newer revolutionary discipline of physics. There's classical physics, and then there's quantum physics. So quantum physics is interesting to us as Buddhists because it explores things that they could appear mysterious, unknowable, and like, whoa, like what? Kind of a thing. And then this is something that I'm going to try to give you a feel for right now. There was a recent article written about the 3 scientists who just won the 2022 Nobel Prize in Physics. And the headline reads like this: Nobel Prize winning scientists' findings show the universe isn't real. Oh, so how do you define real is really what matters here. So for us people maybe who play around in this backyard a little bit, this is something that typically is left for us in other disciplines, philosophy, even Buddhism, especially the study of emptiness, but also like in pop culture, like through like cult films like The Matrix, for example. But however, physics, especially in the form of quantum physics, has now entered this debate in a very empirical way, scientific way. So under what you would call non-quantum mechanics, which I was talking about, like what you would associate with classic physics, everything's defined relative to something that's called local realism, which really means that, like, if you have like an object like a car, it has definite properties independent of the observation or measurement of that thing. So it means the universe exists external to our minds. So for example, a car has wheels even when no one's looking. It's still there, okay? It's local. It means that the car can only be influenced by its immediate surroundings. Hopefully this will make sense to you. It's pretty much what we know and experience, I think, normally. So, any measurable influence under the normal rules of physics are not applicable. Like such as the car can't travel faster than the speed of light. I think we could all accept that, right? All of this, by the way, is roughly analogous to how we normally experience ourselves in our world, the world of phenomena. Everything's local. You hopefully understand that they use that word in quantum physics. That's why I want to use it. It's like as I just described it. We experience our own moment by moment lives in this very local, this thing, if you see me, look at me on the screen, this container that we each are. We're each a container. It's very limiting. But under quantum mechanics, local realism that I just described, it gets a little dicey. These three physicists, who I want to say their names because they're really amazing people, John Clauser from Caltech, Anton Zeilinger, and Alain Aspect. They were the ones given the 2022 Nobel Prize in Physics. And it was for an experiment, get this, that they did all the way back in 1972. That's how long it took to kind of rise to the top of empirical acceptance by the scientific world. And not only did they do it in 1972, they did many versions and subsequent experiments that showed that local realism view of the universe is likely false. That's what is meant by the headline in the article. That's not how things really work. And by the way, in Buddhism, we use that expression quite often. That's not how things really are, how they appear to be. We use those kind of words in English. So now we're starting to get somewhere in terms of connecting it. So this is kind of important. You might stop and say, again, if you're not familiar and comfortable with the sort of Buddhist foundations of emptiness, you might go, what? So I'll try to explain a little bit further. The scientists' findings in these experiments that they won the Nobel Peace Prize, as a prize in physics for, show that the universe can't be locally real. As particles, this universe being made up of particles, we talked about that last week, lack definite what's called spin up or spin down. Particles like electrons and protons have a direction that they spin. They're always in constant movement, by the way, which is fascinating to me. This is called their quantum state, and they lack a spin up or spin down property. They don't have it until it's observed or measured. So this is a big topic, which also we'll talk about when we talk about entanglement. You might go, what's the big deal? It requires somebody to observe. So a particle doesn't have a definitive state, a characteristic that is, you could say it has that inherently until you observe it. So that's what's meant when they say the universe is real, but only when you're looking at it. So we're going to talk about what that means in a few minutes as far as, what I can hypothesize from that. So how each one of us look at it, even the same object, when we do look at something and observe it, isn't even experienced the same way. Quantum mechanics doesn't even go into that. I'm adding this to the dialogue here. So what's going on there? That's a whole nother level. And further, looking at it can also be extended to all of the 6 senses. So you could do mental observation, visual, auditory, smell-based, taste-based, and touch-based. And this points to is central to the experience of each one of our interactions with phenomena. Just think about your day-to-day reality. That's how you interact with phenomena. But what's going on? Why, when you look at the same object I look at, we experience it differently? Well, science at least is telling us, quantum mechanics is telling us, well, we could start by saying it has no property until we look at it. So then where's the property come from in terms of dependently being in existence with no properties and then being observed? Sounds a little bit like the Buddhist concept of dependent origination, that things only arise in dependence on each other. So, these Nobel-winning experiments also demonstrate that 2 particles, we talked about the characteristics of an individual particle, regardless of distance apart, can remain entangled in the quantum realm. The quantum realm being that where things exist with only potential to have characteristics, but do not yet have any characteristics or properties. This contradicts the local realism in Einstein's theory of relativity, which is like, and why does it, contradict Einstein's theory of relativity? Because his theory of relativity says that something can't travel faster than the speed of light. So what quantum physics is saying, that you can have 2 particles that were created from a single particle, split, if you will, and even put at 2 ends of the universe, and they would still be connected. If one exhibits one characteristic upon being observed, the other will exhibit the opposite 100% of the time. The spin up, the spin down principle, specifically. This concept's known as non-locality. So now we're moving away from that normal way of how things really work or seem to work in our day-to-day experience, and that how things maybe behave like a single unit, even when they're separate from each other. This hints at something that is present in a core part of the principle part of Tantric Buddhism. But I'm not going to talk about that here, because that's a separate topic and requires a lot of pre-existing knowledge about different Buddhist practices, and also having authorization to talk about those kind of things, because it's almost like a PhD level kind of discussion, if you will. Not that none of us are not capable of that, but not for this course. But I want to just mention that anyway. So these kind of results have really cleared the way for new technology based upon quantum information, including entanglement of larger known entities in the world of phenomena, including ourselves. So these experiments started with subatomic particles of electrons and protons, but they've evolved over the years to involve larger known entities, I call them, right? So this is fascinating. So we might now start to see the potential connection between quantum mechanics principles such as local, non-local, and entanglement, and be able to see how they could apply to an understanding of emptiness. So, we're going to have to talk a little bit about the theory of emptiness, which is holiness. The Dalai Lama does present initially in that third chapter of the universe in a single in a single atom, and he talks about that theory being proposed initially for the first time formally in Buddhist, not by the Buddha himself, but by a famous Buddhist saint, Nagarjuna, who lived in the 2nd century. And this philosophy of called emptiness, which I've been talking about, and hopefully some of you know a little bit about it, but I'm taking time out to address it a little bit here, reveals that not only do we carry the fundamental error of basing our attachment and clinging to and development of our numerous prejudices on incorrectly giving all ourselves and all other things some sort of fixed inherent quality, but that we kind of mindlessly carry that forward, or habitually carry it forward every moment of our lives. We're experiencing reality incorrectly, and that we need to look at finding our way towards seeing how that's not true. It isn't, that's not real. Again, to correlate it to that essentially everything in existence, ourselves and all phenomena, have no fixed quality, where we exist inherently into ourselves, that we can only exist independently, arising in connection with each other and with things. And that's like the simplest way I can put it. But this is really, really important. It gets to like why this chatter we have here about what quantum physics has to offer us, and even what we were talking about last time, might matter in terms of giving us an understanding of how this philosophical concept of emptiness is not just a concept, but is actually impacts every moment of the way we live, and maybe does something that is, as His Holiness talks about in the book, and Nagarjuna talks about, creates that fundamental error that's the cause of basically all suffering. And so there's a lot that could be said about that. Again, we only have an hour and a half each session here, and that's why I encourage you to read as much as you might need to. Read more about this in His Holiness's book. So I'll just say a little bit more about quantum physics, a few more concepts, and how they relate to what we might be able to think about, because I want to give time to do the meditation at the end, and maybe even have time for a few questions. But quantum physics, there's one other important point I want to make. It basically says that the universe is random, based on what we just talked about in terms of the theory of the theory of non-locality, that something isn't in a fixed, it doesn't have a fixed property until it's observed. That things, when you observe it, well, then it randomly moves beyond the state of having no quality and having an assigned quality, if you will. And I say to that might there be something else at work here? Even the famous physicist, quantum physicist, David Bohm, had a theory of something called hidden variables. It's very controversial in today's quantum physics world. Some people, there's followers of David Bohm. There's some who say hidden variables, not forget it, But I say, could there be, at least conceptually, hidden variables that science doesn't tackle? Could there be consciousness involved? Could there be karma operating that makes it not random and makes it different for each one of us, even when we look at and experience the same thing and observe the same thing? When I observe a piece of artwork, for example, like this morning, I was looking at a news report that was highlighting this special exhibit of paintings in Amsterdam on the painter Vermeer. Vermeer is considered the greatest painter who knew how to use light. And you might look at one of Vermeer's paintings and go, hey, that's nice. I look at the same painting and I melt. I go, it's the same object. Where is that assigned quality coming from? So, this is something that in quantum physics, they make it scientific. They call it the wave function, which is this state where potential information is being held about the object, including its potential location or its momentum. And this is where it gets tricky, because in physics, like the mere act of measuring, as I said before, or observing the particle, they use the word that when that happens, all the potential positions and locations collapse. They just collapse into a particular state that can be observed. And that's called the particle wave duality. And it smells like dependent origination to me, because science doesn't deal with consciousness as part of their formulas and their mathematical equations. They still don't understand why or how a wave function collapses. That's why they call it random. And they just call it something when they can't answer it, but they still, think they have something that maybe works. They call it the measurement problem. In other words, they don't have an answer to that, which is fascinating, right? Again, I say, could the universe, maybe the universe isn't random, that the measurement problem can be understood within the framework of consciousness and karma. And that's partly what His Holiness is trying to indicate in his text, the universe in a single atom. So one other important concept is that, when we look at a particular, so what does a particular particle look like before it's observed? I've been kind of hinting at that pretty overtly for the last 15 minutes. Well, according to science, quantum mechanics, we can't know that. As a particle before being observed is in what's called a state of quantum superposition, which basically means it's in multiple infinite states. Sound familiar? Maybe that's something akin to what the Buddhist concept of, unfathomable amount of universes and world systems being at any given moment in existence. Maybe even sound something akin to one of the current sort of accepted but not accepted by a lot of the scientific community, but a lot of big companies are putting a lot of money into it, which is the multiverse, right? So basically, we are talking about, if we talk about like a Mahayana Buddhist, that Nagarjuna basically is, this kind of thinking isn't foreign. It isn't exotic. It isn't like, what are you talking about? That this notion of emptiness and new physics really sort of have quite a fit with each other. Even in ways that, for somebody like me who's been practicing for decades, it's like, which is one of the things that attracted me to quantum physics, just to look at it, and specifically quantum mechanics. And I think also His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So, but here's where I want to go before we wrap up. It's like, what can we pose or arguments can we make based on what we just sort of talked through? If all potential phenomena, including self, is actually present in us, which we talked about somewhat last time as well, and since that's what we're made up of, and at the same time, all potential phenomena is in infinite states, quantum superposition, that's what that's called. And only when observed and measured does it collapse into an experiential moment where we can put specific characteristics on it. Can we not say that all phenomena, including self, only arise in dependence on their always being present, the potential of all phenomena, and there being an observer? That's dependent origination. And further, that is only because all phenomena itself, including ourselves, is possible because it does not have any fixed self-existence. It has potentiality to be for any one of us what we experience it as moment by moment. Again, I don't experience a Vermeer painting the same way you do. I don't experience my backyard the same way you do. You don't even experience my backyard. None of you have ever seen it. But if you did, you might go, yuck, what a messy yard. And I might go, I love my natural backyard, you know? So where is that quality coming from? Is it dependently arising moment by moment? And so if this is the case, then might it be true that as conscious sentient beings, we are simply enacting this process of arising potential of all phenomena and collapsing it in every single moment? Is maybe that's all that's going on. Every moment, 24/7, 7 days a week, every day of the month, year, and a lifetime, and maybe even beyond that. And further, that the agent for that process is consciousness and karmic ripening, which functions on a physical level through our six senses, visual, moments of experience, and the rest, all the other senses, working in concert with our physical sense apparatuses, eyes, nose, mouth, etc. And further, what causes that process of karmic ripening to even occur? And that's what we're going to be going into in the next session. And so all of this is meant, last session and this session, really sort of meant to set the stage to talk about this. And His Holiness gives us a bit of a preview to this in part of chapter 3. And I think it's really interesting. He does it in the form of a question that he poses. So he says this: apart from misrepresenting reality, what's wrong with believing that things have an independent intrinsic existence of, what's wrong with that? What's the big deal? So for Nagarjuna, he says, this belief has really serious negative consequences. Nagarjuna argues that it is the belief in intrinsic existence that sustains the basis for a self-perpetuating dysfunction in our engagement with the world and with our fellow sentient beings. By according intrinsic properties of attractiveness, we react to certain objects and events with deluded attachment, while towards others to which we accord intrinsic properties of unattractiveness, we react with deluded aversion. By the word deluded, he means with ignorance, lack of wisdom. So he says, in other words, Nagarjuna argues that grasping at the independent existence of things leads to afflictions, which in turn give rise to a chain of destructive actions, reactions, and, get this, the Buddha's first noble truth, suffering. In the final analysis for Nagarjuna, the theory of emptiness is not a question of mere conceptual understanding of reality. It has profound psychological and ethical implications. So even when His Holiness asked one of his favorite lifelong friend, quantum physicists, about the same question, this physicist's name was David Bohm. He answered this way: from the perspective of modern science, apart from the question of misrepresentation, actually, it's a question that His Holiness asked. His response was, if we examine the various ideologies that tend to divide humanity, such as racism, extreme nationalism, and the Marxist class struggle, one of the key factors of their origins is the tendency to perceive as inherently divided and connected. From these misconceptions spring the belief that each of these divisions is essentially independent and self-existent. He's saying the same thing Nagarjuna said. So His Holiness, though, says at the end of that, a little bit later, he says, I wish more physicists saw the world the way David Bohm did. That is not so much the case. Most physicists leave it on the sidelines, So these are sort of important questions that I try to end this session with in order to hopefully have it make some sense why I would take up some of your precious time this morning to talk about quantum physics and quantum mechanics, because I'm trying to show you that there is a way to relate on every level, going back to last week's session, going through to this week's session, that even on the outer physical sciences level of modern cosmology and astronomy, as well as quantum mechanics, that these same principles are being indicated to be true, meaning the principles of discussed here so far, the principles of entanglement and emptiness, the first two E's. So I'd like to end today by doing a short meditation, if that's all right with you guys, that is essentially what I call superposition. So the idea of this meditation is really to do kind of what we did last time with the meditation I did on singularity, which is to familiarize yourself through a meditative process with this concept where maybe we can relate to it in a meditative sense. So we'll do that. I'll do a quick one, and it will be compressed like I did the last one, but you should elongate it and stay with some of what's covered in this quick version. And that's, thank goodness, DNKL makes these recordings, because then you can go back and, you can kind of work through it and spread it out. Because a meditation session should be at least 15 minutes, 20 minutes, a half an hour, especially if it's guided. So we'll do a quick one. And then if we have any time left at the end, because it's already 11:15, we will move on to maybe if anybody has any questions. So if everybody would, just relax in your current seated position, or you can move on to a meditation cushion if you prefer to do meditation in that posture. But the most important thing is to relax your body from head to toe, starting from an awareness of the outside of your body, and just doing a couple of long inhale and exhales, which should bring your attention to the movement of your breath moving in and out. And the idea of putting your attention on following your breath moving in and out has a twofold purpose. One is to calm your mind relative to listening to all the jibber jabber that I just rattled on about. But at the same time, to have an awareness that your mind actually is always moving in concert with your breath. That's how we experience everything within ourselves, but also outside of ourselves, such as how we were speaking today about the potential, the superposition of all things. So follow your breath a number of times with that sort of thought, holding in your mind. And as we were talking about particles and light, we'll try to move ourselves closer to that potential that is in all of existence, that we have the precious opportunity to engage with moment by moment. We'll do that by starting from our toes and our head simultaneously. Imagine your physical body becoming light, translucent, nothing but the fine particles of protons and electrons that make up light. Moving from head and toes simultaneously, bring that completion of your turning your body into light occur at your heart center. At the same time, as we're remembering to have our mind follow our breath, have an awareness that this cycle of the formation of any given universe is no different than us taking a single breath. We start the breath in, and that's the formation of the universe. And as we hold the breath at the top for just a second, that's its abiding. And as we exhale, that is the ending of the universe. And as we relax at the end of that exhale, that's the moment of voidness or emptiness. Before what? Before we start another cycle that rides on each breath. Formation, abiding, ending, and emptiness. Every breath. It's natural. It makes sense. We can think of every breath being not only a cycle of the universe, but also our own cycle of birth, life, abiding in life. As we reach the top of the breath and as we exhale, death. And that moment before we start a new inhale as being the emptiness or void. In Buddhism, we call it entering the bardo. So everything exists in our breath, all that we know. Relax in that knowledge. And as our meditation occurred last week, where we brought through the process of emanating light out to the entire universe in order to collect back, gather and collect back to our heart center the entire known universe, bringing it to our heart center and identifying that as that moment of singularity where all existence is present in one location at your heart before the dawn of time and space. Then that whole presence in your heart center is there, you're holding it. And likewise, as we did last week, taking your entire self, that inside world, from head to toe, which is now just light particles, similar to all that exists outside of us. We bring all that from head to toe, meeting at our heart center. An internal moment of singularity, or in Buddhism, what we call the indestructible drop. All is present in our heart. And holding it there, we next think about what we learned today about potential. Something moves in us that puts into motion time and space all that we experience, both externally in the world of phenomena and ourselves. Try to have an awareness that that's what happens, and that it's from that heart center that both of those things take formation, meaning the phenomena, the world of phenomena outside, and our internal self. So you can envision the movement of that gathered singularity moving back out and taking shape around you in the whole world of phenomena that you know. And likewise, your body takes, in the form of light, takes its shape and form as it was a moment before you brought it all to your heart center. And as this is done, relax in that with one question to ponder. What is that movement that caused that to happen? That caused time and space to start? That formation to move? That was known as the Big Bang. That caused your breath to start to move in, abiding, and then out, and then moving into the void. It might be something we call consciousness, and that movement might occur through the ripening of our previous actions of body, speech, and mind that cause the consciousness to move and to create the outside world we know, literally. Catching the quantum potential, the quantum superposition that is all potential, capturing that in a specific container that for you is unique. It's you. You're the contain. And that's different from me. And that's different from each one of us. And it's different from the incalculable amount of sentient living beings, even just on this planet. And we think finally about what His Holiness shared with us in that question of why does it make a difference, how we then experience that. What does it matter if we experience it as having intrinsic existence or not? And during the week, think about a way to read that section of the chapter 4 by His Holiness in The Universe in a Single Atom, where you can reflect on that. Why does it matter? Thinking about what David Bohm had to say as well, what Nagarjuna had to say as well. This will frame how we move into our next session in this course. For now, we've already manifested back out the singularity of the universe around us from our heart center and ourself, but we're still in that light form of existence as light particles. So move your mind back more closely to your breath and your awareness of that, and bring your physical form back into a concrete form, flesh and blood as we know it, and our organs. And once you've completed that process, moving from your heart down to your toes and up to the top of your head and your limbs, take a couple of exhales, deep exhales, and bring yourself back to the room where we can take on our normal, ordinary self again. So, as I said, that was a quick walk through a guided meditation that you should try to elongate and work with. And the same with the singularity meditation we did last week. And that leads us right into where we're going to go next week, where we start to connect the dots of where we want to go with these observations we've made in these first two classes in direct connection to the questions we pose about how does this connect to compassion as a practice, and how does that put us in tune with much of what we discussed here and what we can benefit from in these thought experiments that we do in science and His Holiness asks us to do when we're looking at the Buddhist philosophy of emptiness. So we're at the end of our class, but I still want to ask if anybody has any questions. It always makes me a little nervous when nobody has any questions. We have a couple, I think, maybe. Well, thank you for that comment, Karen. That's nice. And then Laura says, would the physicist theory be similar to the mind-only school? Some people say so. And there's a big debate in current quantum physics and mechanics and theory circles where these are discussed. David Bohm, who I mentioned, is quite controversial to some physicists, where he talks extensively about concepts that try to take us beyond this realm of sort of having everything that is experience be coming only from the mind and then being projected out into the world, and that world outside of us is what is not real, if you will. That's a very primitive way to refer to mind only, but for this group maybe that makes some sense. So it depends on what scientists you're talking to. They have as varied a view of the various theories and principles in quantum mechanics that as we do in various schools of Buddhism and religion at large. So hopefully that helps, Laura. One other question comes from Ying. Is consciousness made of empty particles as well? Or consciousness manifests as wave, but can interact with empty particles? Well, from a quantum point of view, and I didn't talk about it in today's class, there's something called Bell's theorem. Bell was a physicist who did experiments where he showed that depending on how you were observing the movement of light particles through slits in a wall that would then be caught on a projection behind that wall and measured, they would sometimes show up with the characteristic of particles, and they would sometimes show up with the characteristics of waves. So that's sort of like, again, this goes to to that fundamental I tried to present in this class, which is they don't have any quality until we see we have an observer, and even further from quantum mechanics point of view, what tool of measurement they're actually using. And also when we talk about empty particles from the point of view of His Holiness mentioning it, that's within the context of, like, I have to say, English is a language that, is a poor representation of like what is meant in the original language of the Kalachakra Tantra, that describes that, So then these are things we could talk about more. And when we talk about consciousness, we have different levels of consciousness. When we talk about it in Buddhism, we have the consciousness that interacts with our physical apparatuses. We have actually 6 consciousness. We have touch consciousness, we have taste, etc. Right? And mental the 6 senses. And then we have subtle consciousness, which is something that is talked about in Buddhism when you're doing certain practices of getting closer to like where maybe that core experience, the direct experience of emptiness can happen. So there's a lot going on there. Hard to really talk about too definitively. There's whole courses you can take about that from qualified teachers. Then Rachel made a comment here saying, not clear on how consciousness is an agent to begin the process of coming into being. Yeah, I mean, it's got to be careful there, because there has to be, if you have an ongoing cycle of, let's say, this formation of a universe, it's abiding, and then it's destruction, then you have this other phase that's called emptiness or the void. There has to be something operative there that then, as I did in the meditation, when you're in that moment of singularity, there has to be something that then causes it to move. So in a Buddhist worldview, then that's like consciousness and it's attending karma. And that's something that we'll talk about more in the next session. But I will make one more point to your not being clear on that. Then it also, you can't forget the idea of beginninglessness. It's not that consciousness started anywhere. And this process didn't start anywhere. It's been there since beginningless time. And so that's a little bit beyond the realm of conceptual understanding. It's more of just a vague idea. But I think we can talk, and we will talk a little bit more about this, not only because you bring it up, but I planned it in our next session. So hopefully you'll be there and we can gain hopefully more clarity. And then if you don't, maybe you can ask further questions there. So that seems to be everything for today in terms of questions, unless somebody else has a question they want to ask out loud. Those are the ones via chat. I don't see anybody who's looking for, oh, there, Lindsay has a question. Don't forget to turn off your mute.
Yeah, it's relating to Kala chakra. I found the connections there fascinating, because we hear about still points, moments of turning, sort of cycles of the lunar month and so on. So is, say, you know, when it's describing something being in 16 parts and there's 30 days in the lunar year, and then the 16th is that moment of stillness. Is that the moment of singularity, or is that a moment of void, or is it both?
Well, from a conceptual point of view, and in context with how we're talking about this topic in this class, it could be both.
Okay.
Conceptually, right? And it also indicates that beyond what I indicated in the meditation, that we can start to experience our every breath as that cycle, that it indicates, as it does in the Kala chakra system, that all cycles of time and space, months, years, days, hours, minutes, seconds, keep breaking that apart, is an entire world system. There's nothing structurally that's any different.
I see.
There's nothing random, and it's all the same. It's just that we don't see it that way. The Kali chakra system indicates that. And so in everything that we do in these cycles, there is the potential to consciously have an awareness that this is all there is, this process. What we do with that's another matter, but I find that fascinating, and that's sort of what quantum mechanics has a lot to say about this. Again, leaving out consciousness, but just talking about cycles. This is one of the most wonderful things I think about the Kala chakra system, and it's not negating anything. It's just making that observation.
No, that's really helpful. Thanks.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Okay. I have to flip back and forth between two screens to see everybody, just make sure nobody's going like this. All right. So hopefully I didn't bore anybody too much. And as I said in the first class, try to keep this accessible and interesting. So next time we'll relate it more directly to Buddhist practices and our fundamental questions that we posed at the top of this course and in the course description. Okay. So thank you, everyone. And I appreciate everyone being here, and have a good rest of your Sunday and rest of the week.
Thank you, John.
Thanks again. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you, John.
Bye-bye.